Everybody again. For those just joining us, my name is Kristen Todd. I'm with the CFO Leadership Council. I have the pleasure of introducing this next program. I'm excited about each and every session here, but this one in particular. I'm a New England girl living in Foxborough, Mass, and a huge sports fan. It got me thinking about some fun numbers. Across our 26 chapters since we were founded in 2006, our chapter cities have celebrated a total of 40 championships, 9 Super Bowls, 9 Stanley Cups, 11 World Series, and 11 NBA championships. 8 in my hometown, but who's counting? If you won one of them, I hope you celebrated it all and enjoyed the moments. We certainly cheered along with you. There's nothing quite like living in a city of champions. Speaking of champions, it is my honor to kick off our final program for today. Lessons from the sports world, how America's most competitive industry is facing its greatest challenge. Featuring Kathy Milthorpe, Ronda, Sedillo, Leigh Stienberg, Evan Wasch, and our moderator today, ESPN's Randy Scott. It's my distinct pleasure to tell you a little bit more about our Power Sessions moderator. Randy Scott is an anchor on ESPN SportsCenter. Randy joined ESPN in June 2012 as an anchor for ESPN's flagship program. Prior to joining ESPN, Randy served as anchor reporter for Nesson in Boston and WINK-TV in Fort Myers. Among his many accomplishments, Randy earned Florida's Associated Press and Society of Professional Journalism's Best Sports Feature Award in 2008 for his feature Deaf Softball Star, and Best Sports Promotions honors from Oklahoma Association of Broadcasters. He is a Vienna, Virginia native and a graduate of Northwestern University. You can catch Randy weekdays 7 to 10 on ESPN SportsCenter, where he starts off many sports fans' days. Randy, the mic is all yours.
Kristen, thank you for that. Thank you for that generous introduction. We ran through the show and we discussed what we were going to talk about. I don't remember the discussion of New England Sports Championships. I must have missed that. I don't know if anyone else on the panel was there for that, but I appreciate the introduction. In keeping the conversation moving, I'd like for each of our panelists here who represent a wide variety of the sports and entertainment worlds to maybe handle their own introduction. So why don't I try to work geographically if I can. Let's start out west. Leigh, if you wouldn't mind taking the reins here, just a quick introduction of yourself here as we'll keep the conversation moving.
So I've been representing professional athletes since 1975. We've done 64 first-round draft picks in football. The very first pick in the first round, 8 different years. I have 11 players in football in the Hall of Fame, big baseball practice, basketball, boxing. And it's all based on the concept of the athlete as role model. And we ask them to retrace their roots to the high school community, collegiate community, and professional community, and try to leave a legacy and make a difference. So next year will be my 47th draft. I started when woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers were rotating around the earth. And I'm so happy to be with this great panel.
Ronda, I'm going to send it. I promised you that you wouldn't start, but you'll be on deck to start. So Ronda Sedillo, CFO of the San Diego Padres.
Thank you, everyone. Lifetime native San Diegan, even went to college here, both UCSD, graduated from San Diego State, spent the first 7 years of my life in the tax practice at PricewaterhouseCoopers, moved on to another client of mine for 12 years, which was an insurance agency, and I've now been with the San Diego Padres since January of 2013. 8 seasons, 7 of which were very normal.
And then this one, and we'll dive
and then this one
as well. My cartography skills are not up to par, but Kathy, I think if we move west to east, it's probably you. So Kathy Milthorpe, CFO of the LPGA.
Oh, thank you, Randy, and great to be with everyone today. So we're hopefully navigating through a little bit of rusty weather with the storms outside. So hopefully the storms won't be too bad, but have had a great pleasure of working for the LPGA now nearly about 28 years. Similar to the other group folks here, I started my career in public accounting with Coopers and Lybrand, and then went to work for the LPGA when they were one of my clients. have had a couple of opportunities to work as well in other sports, including motorsports, where I did more lobbying in Washington, which was an interesting time, maybe not as interesting as today, but had an opportunity to see that. But I will tell you that I'm just really pleased to be here with this group and honored that I get an opportunity to work for the longest running women's sports organization. So it's a great time to be in women's sports.
Okay, there's a lot to dive into. You have a specific challenge with how decentralized your athletes are, to be sure, and I want to dive into that. Evan Wasch, head of basketball strategy and analytics for the NBA. If you wouldn't mind taking the reins, and then we'll get started with the conversation.
Sure, happy to. And Randy, Kristen also failed to note, I'm also a Northwestern alum. Somehow we missed that connection
There we go.
in our panel prep. And the 3-0 Northwestern Wildcats, nationally ranked, of course. Also an alum of MIT Sloan Business School, and proud to be involved in this, given the connection with MIT and the CFO Leadership Council. So just excited to be here. I've been with the NBA about 10 years. The last 5 or so in the role Randy mentioned, running a department we call basketball strategy and analytics. And essentially what we do is we oversee anything related to the on-court product in the areas of strategy, data, and technology. So that might include game scheduling, how we think about the rules of the game to make it most fan engaging, protect the integrity of the competition, as well as look at player health initiatives, just to, in simple terms, to try to make basketball better.
Okay, well, we have such a short amount of time to have our conversation here, but Kathy, I do want to start with you, because I feel like one of the challenges that you are facing with the LPGA is unique to the LPGA, but there are leadership tenets that could probably be drawn from that for other sports, to be sure, but also other industries. And that would be maintaining your corporate sponsorships and your corporate relationships at a time where financially, especially over the last 8-9 months, corporate stability has been something that's been in short supply, I would think. So with regard to that specific challenge, how have you and how has the LPGA as a whole been able to maintain those relationships really for the viability of the organization?
Yeah, it certainly has been an interesting time, and no different than any other sports, a challenging time, not only for our athletes, but as well as our corporate partners. And for us, we're also not only navigating through the US, but through a global kind of pandemic and global sponsors. I will tell you that one of the fundamental principles that we have at the LPGA was really creating connections with our athletes, but also with our sponsors. And we think of them, we don't really call them sponsors, we call them partners. I'm sure other companies do the same. But we've really taken an important focus over the last probably say 5 to 7 years to develop those relationships. That kind of proved dividends when this tough time came. We were fortunate enough to only lose one title partner during this entire pandemic. All of our partners actually extended their tournament relationships. So if they took a year off, they were able to do that. And I think that really does come down to, it doesn't come down to contracts. It doesn't come down to, finances. It comes down to people relationships. So I will tell you, we've spent a lot of time on that. It certainly has helped. And we've seen, not only have we done that with the partners, but we've made sure that the athletes continue to contact title partners and remind them about how much they appreciate those partners staying with us. So it's made a huge difference in kind of our overall business. And frankly, on the corporate partner side, our revenues are actually up when it's come to actually engaging them, and whether it's virtual conferences or other types of things, we actually exceeded our revenue budget for this year in that regard. So it was quite remarkable in a time when it's been pretty darn challenging.
To be sure, and Leigh, to that point that Kathy made about how it is a people relationship business. I mean, the same can certainly be said for what you do. And with regard to your management and leadership of your clients at a time where I think they would be, allowed to have a certain level of fear at the unknown of what was happening as their sports were taken away suddenly, abruptly. And I'm wondering how you manage some of those conversations with your clients with regard to their overall stability in future here moving forward.
So as an economic matter, having baseball with no fans, having basketball with no fans, having football with limited fans obviously takes a whack out of the compensation pool. And so it affects athletes and their contracts. for example, the NFL is made up revenue-wise, 38% is gate. So if you no longer have that gate, then it means an adjustment of each client.
Mhm.
I think sports have done a sensational job. And first, I want to say to the CFOs, thank you for doing what you do. If it wasn't for a great CFO at our business, I'd be out there selling apples. And you guys protect us. You have such sage research, so it's an honor to speak to all of you. Anyway, the individual athletes have a decision. Do they play or do they not play? They could opt out of any sport. And they basically, with a few exceptions, all our clients decided to play. If you go to the stadia, I went to Hard Rock last week in Miami because we have Tua Tagovailoa for his first start as quarterback. And I just came back from Dallas. You can't get out of your car in the parking lot without putting on a mask. They've got people roving through the parking lot. They bring the groups in measured numbers, so you don't all go in at one time. If you're on the escalator, there's a fellow that tells you that you have to leave 6 escalator steps
Yeah.
for the next thing. When I was in the luxury box, they had a team that was wiping down every surface from the knob to the bathroom to the counters. So I think that the players in some senses are safer than if they were on their own. And if I had a choice between having a college football son roaming the streets like other millennials and having him under Nick Saban's tutelage with testing every day and all the rest of it. So the testing has been constant. And we've just encouraged our athletes to stay focused on what they can control, which is what's going on the field. But I think they're great role models, and sports has been a great role model for the right way to deal with the pandemic. Because you see them wearing masks on the sidelines, you see all the different things that they're doing. And sports has the ability to trigger imitative behavior because of the visage of the individual athletes or the amazing television ratings. So I think sports are playing a really positive role here.
Randy's muted.
We can't hear you, Randy.
Not great. Not great.
Now we can hear you.
Okay.
You're back.
Yeah.
You're back. Don't move.
Yes.
All right. Touching nothing. Nothing. All right. Ronda, with specific regard to your sports calendar, with Major League Baseball's calendar, you face these unique challenges of, hey, we're in spring training, we're in Arizona, we're going to have a full season, to then suddenly the stop down, the prolonged monetary battle. If you would just walk us through what those early months were and when you felt confident, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to have our season.
I was looking back on the timeline of events. You know, it was March 12th, 4 o'clock Eastern, when MLB said no more games. And we're over in Arizona, we're about ready to take the field. All of a sudden, everything shuts down. That's a Thursday. Friday, we close the office here in San Diego, send everybody home, thinking this is going to be a 2-week endeavor. By March 16th, just 3 days later, the commissioner comes on and says it's at least till mid-May till we start this. So in just a matter of days, we went from 2-week delay to now it's mid-May. You know, and then the circus began with the dialogue between MLB, the ownership group, the Players Association, and everybody having their input and, you know, how they thought the season should go, play the full 162 games, you know, shortened season, and of course, all of the bickering that went back and forth between the groups. You know, knowing that every week that was wasted and when we didn't reach an agreement and people clamoring for sports and that, we were shortening our season on the other end, there was, oh, well, we can still get 162 games in. Well, that's all fine. You can play baseball outside in San Diego in November, but not a lot of other places. So that really wasn't feasible. And so, finally, it was probably mid-June, actually, before we really thought maybe the 10th of June, 15th of June, when we thought this is going to happen. The sides had finally gotten close enough where, and even if you think back, the commissioner said we're going to play, 100% certain we're going to play, and then a couple of days later backtracked when things got a little tenuous with the MLBPA.
Yeah.
So back and forth. And so when both teams finally said, and in the meantime, we're doing budgets every other day. What if, this many games, that many games, no fans, TV ratings, this, that, and the other. So on June 23rd, when it was announced that we actually were going to play the 60-game season and hopefully stay healthy, 125-page protocol book on all of the what to do if and how to keep the players and the coaches and the staff all safe to get to the end. Obviously, the big money was to get through the World Series because of television. So, it was a 3 or 4 months of just sleepless nights. What if, and just not knowing. So it was nice when we finally found out.
Evan, Ronda points to March 12th, and I'll always remember March 11th because that's when the NBA made its decision in the middle of a nightly slate of games. And I'm wondering from your perspective within, obviously, the association, just what you're going to remember about how the league arrived at that decision and really the days and weeks that came after that.
Yeah, it's very similar, I think, to what Ronda described in evolution and just how quick it all happened. I would say the NBA had the benefit of a little bit of early preparation in this because we have several hundred employees on the ground in China. And so from a league office perspective, we had been dealing with COVID months before March from an employee management perspective. So we understood the virus, we understood some of the protocols that were needed to protect people at the time. Obviously, a lot of that's changed. So we were in constant contact with medical experts throughout January, February, understanding what the implication could be, if and when the virus reached the U.S. at the levels it had in China. And we're also lucky enough to be in lockstep with our teams and with our Players Association. So basically, that early March period was probably daily check-ins with some cross-section of those groups, being guided by medical experts to understand what all the options were that we were facing. And right up until the night of March 11th, even as late as the afternoon of March 11th, we had a Board of Governors call among all our team governors, where we talked about what types of steps we would take. If you recall, at that time, it had been the mass gathering ban had been put in place in the San Francisco area, and the Warriors were scheduled to host a game the next night, March 12th. And so we had announced, I believe just that day, that game was going to be played without fans, which would have been the first sporting event, at least, for us to go without fans. And so we went into that Board of Governors meeting talking about, should we be mandating fanless games across the country, just in limited markets? Should we respond to local jurisdiction protocols? Should we be taking a hiatus, a couple week break to, no one was talking about anything longer than 2 weeks, as Ronda said, but should we take a 2 week break to see how this evolves? And we sort of came out of that with some guidance from the teams, but a little bit of wait and see, right? We're going to go market by market and see what happens. And then, of course, 3 hours later, Rudy Gobert's positive test comes back, and at that point, it's a no-brainer that if we have players who are at risk and exposed, the games just had to stop. And so we immediately went into a period of the hiatus and said, well, let's now have the pause and see when we come back. Of course, at that time, I don't think anyone would have expected we were going to be on a break for 4.5 months and coming back in the bubble, but that's where we came.
Kathy, with specific regard to that international, pool of athletes, I feel like that's something that you've had to deal with as well, and a certain measure of unique challenge to that. I'm wondering, with regard to the international way that your organization runs, how you're handling, telecommuting, how you're handling productivity when everyone is as scattered as they are, and you're trying to maintain whatever business as usual looks like right now. Yeah,
it's a great question, and we similarly had some some heads up to that, like what Evan described. We have an office in Asia and Seoul, Korea, where we've got some employees, and in some ways we were prepared, and in many other ways we weren't. We thought it'd be, certainly just focused and stay in Asia, and we were listening to the scientists, but there was a certain level of denial that, it won't be that bad in the States. And then I think our date was March 12th, that Friday before we were going to play in Arizona. And we were wrestling. The PGA Tour was playing, down the road and can continue to play the next week. And so we were trying to determine whether to pull play and stop the events. But immediately, probably only a few days later, we moved the employees to completely virtual. And the good news is, I would say, of all the things we've had to go through with pandemic and running 1,000 budget scenarios, moving actually virtual has been pretty seamless with employees. Maybe it's a little different in Florida because we're not dealing with folks having to go on mass transportation or those types of things. But our technology was in place to do that. We have a smaller workforce. We've only got about 150 employees, and they were fairly well connected. So, this is when technology actually saved us instead of hurt us. Sometimes those things don't always work well. But I will tell you what has made the biggest difference is you have to continue to be connected and have regular communication in a crisis type of environment. So we were having weekly calls, certainly daily calls with management, weekly calls with, all employees. We still do that probably every 3 weeks with, the commissioner, as well as all those team members, doing that with the board once a month. Players, we actually have all player calls. So I think the ability to be able to stay connected and keep communicating at least takes some of the fear out, and also you're kind of in it together and you come up with solutions that you wouldn't have even thought of with that kind of support.
Leigh, I'm thinking specifically about, we have the NBA draft that's going to be held virtually on our campus. Commissioner Silver is going to be there on Wednesday. But with regard to the NFL draft that had to happen virtually suddenly with Roger Goodell and his sort of his den and conducting that, everything that goes into that draft night can be backtimed, I'm sure, to workouts and draft prep, and you go to these draft academies and you get ready for the combine, and all of that had to be so different this year, Leigh, with regard to really any sport, but specifically NFL. What specific challenges did you come across for your clients in their preparation for that?
So basically, there's a second season of scouting. They take the game film, and then players go off and train, and then they're tested in all-star games, which we're playing. And then they go to scouting combine, which is the mega test. And right after that is when the restrictions came down. So we had Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama and Jerry Jeudy from Alabama. Mm-hmm. And Tua had a specific question whether or not he was going to be healthy.
Yeah.
So our time to be able to display that was going to be during what's called Pro Scouting Day on the college campus. All the Pro Scouting days were canceled. All the in-person meetings with players on campus were canceled. All of the trips that players took to different franchises were canceled. So they have this elaborate system, and then right in the middle of it, they dropped this pandemic bomb. But I think the draft was virtual. Of course, what you saw on TV was only a representation of it. The league was very concerned that people not look like they're violating social distancing. So you saw a mother or father on ESPN and the kid. Now, what you didn't see behind them was about 100 people that were all gathered there for draft night. Draft night is the fruition of dreams. It ratchets very tense, and then boom, there's an explosion of exultation. Yeah. So I think that the show itself on NFL Network and ESPN, people loved, because they made the commissioner look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood,
They did.
And they liked it because they saw a lot of families and a lot of people. And as to how accurate their their prognostications and scouting were, without that, the best predictor of future success is past success. So they still had game film for how these athletes really played. And if you look at this draft, Joe Burrow is starring for Cincinnati, and Justin Herbert for the Chargers, and our guy Tua for the Dolphins. So they made the same great picks and the same mistakes they would have made had everything been normal. But the great thing, and I'm so grateful to the NBA and Major League Baseball, is that these leagues and these front offices were so creative in how they responded to this. And we have young athletes, we can adapt, but they were so creative in pulling off a basketball season. Oh my God, you know, which was great. Now I'm from Southern California. It was really great that the Lakers won. And in baseball, I'm from Southern California, and that was splendid because the Dodgers won. And in football, last year we had the MVP of the Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes, and this year they're on the way to another one. So that's really splendid. None of this would have happened without the sage thinking of leagues and how creative they could be and how they could adapt. And they did such a sensational job that leagues, specific franchises, we have, and stadia, people running stadia. If when I was at Dallas, there were 31,000 fans in the stands. How that fits with any metric, I'm not sure, but it was Jerry World, so you know, you could have it. But you could see the return of fans, and even though there were 143,000 cases yesterday, which even though our national government doesn't recognize that this is happening, even though there were all those cases, you feel really safe going to those games. And you can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
So to that point, Rhonda, the idea of being creative and almost using this as an opportunity to try something new, I feel like Major League Baseball deserves a lot of credit there, because it was, hey, okay, 7-inning doubleheaders, and maybe we'll start, extra innings with a runner on second. To what extent do you feel like some of those will last? And to what extent do you feel like this has been an opportunity of sorts? Like, okay, we've been dealt this hand, let's go ahead and make the best of it.
I think, to your point, I think everybody decided, if there ever was a year to try this out, let's do all of those things in this otherwise crazy year that we're going to have. There's going to be the proverbial asterisk at the end of the season anyway. And really in the spirit of, trying to get the game in, keep the people healthy. We have the taxi squad in case you had a COVID positive test result come back. You could exchange players real quick. But I think what it did for the fans, and, by the time we started playing, fans were clamoring for sports, any kind of sports, quite frankly. And so we were obviously happy to get back on board. But, I think the players, the fans, there's nothing worse. I mean, at least I'm on the West Coast. You guys are on the East Coast. And, when a baseball game goes into the 12th or 15th inning or something like that, it's probably midnight, your time zone. You're not even watching the end of the game. So the shorter games, the shorter doubleheader, so that we could get the number of games in, so that the standings meant something, not one team with only 50 games completed and the other teams with 60. The universal DH, I think that has gotten, overwhelming support. That'll be interesting. We're in the midst of a collective bargaining agreement. The current bargaining agreement expires in the end of 2021. There's some talk about extending that. I don't know how far that is. But, all of these things are certainly going to come to fruition. The bottom line is the fans loved it. It made the fans stay engaged with the games, all of those things. Where it wasn't all these run-on games where everything's just depleted, and by the end of the game, you've got a center fielder pitching who loses the game, those kind of things. So a great time to try some of these things. But the fans love it. I think the players love it. Now it's just going to be, can we get it all built into the new CBA and monetarily compensated for all these changes?
Evan, one of the things that the NBA seemingly didn't have to worry about, at least to get the season started, was coming to an agreement on the finances, the whatever it was, and maybe it was the fact that it was a continuation of the season, or I wonder if it was a continuation of the relationship that the commissioner's office has with the Players Association. And so I wonder if you wouldn't mind maybe shedding some light into how that sort of level of trust is built. I'm not saying it was done quickly, but how we arrived to the point where Adam Silver could say, hey, no, we're going to do this bubble. You guys need to trust me. And Chris Paul and the Players Association said, yeah, we will.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a huge key to it. And echoing a comment from earlier, I think that constant engagement was also critical because that level of engagement builds trust as well. And so if you had asked any of us on March 12th, do we think we're going to end up playing in a bubble? We would have said absolutely not. That was the idea of sort of the lockdown, the restrictions. That wasn't something we had contemplated. But we immediately formed cross-sectional working team, a committee essentially across the league and the Players Association. And that group got together at a minimum weekly. And then we even divided further into 4 subgroups. So we looked at the health and safety piece, the operational piece, the broadcast piece, and then my area, the sort of schedule and format of competition. And so that committee had the Players Association, had direct players. Chris Paul was on every one of those calls, and we're directly talking about all of these issues so that anything that concerned them, we would talk through, we would find middle ground. And ultimately, we had the same objective in mind, which was to safely finish a season, right? And so while we wouldn't have said, let's start in a bubble, and by the way, we probably wouldn't have been in Florida had we known the case rate was going to be what it was when we got there. But we made those decisions in May and said, this is the safest way for us to complete our season. This is the way we can prevent infection, prevent spread, maximize the economics, and maximize the competitive opportunity. And at that point, we immediately had buy-in from everyone because it sort of, to your point, they saw the light as to what needed to be done to do this. And that level of trust was there. And then we had constant engagement once everyone was on the ground. And so it was the bubble experience on the day of Game 6 of the finals was wildly different than the bubble experience when everyone arrived on July 7th, because we were constantly evolving based on the feedback we were getting, whether it was around food or housing or equipment or testing, protocols, restrictions. All of that was just constantly moving as both the medical landscape changed and we understood more and more about the virus, but also as the players got further into that experience and made clear to us what needed to change or stay the same. And that was frankly the key to the success we had this summer.
And it was a success. Not a single positive test among NBA players, or I believe coaches as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, players and team staff. We didn't have a single positive test.
Single one. I want to open it up, if we could, to some question and answer opportunities here. And let's see. There's Kelly has a good one. Kelly, I'm going to botch the pronunciation of your last name. I apologize in advance, but it looks like Bargavos. And the first one is a broad one, and really any of you could take this. Is, do you think the pandemic will drive a permanent change to the economics of the professional sports industry? And I'm wondering who feels, Leigh, you're already shaking your head. No?
No, I think in the long run, we're going to be fine. First of all, I want to thank Ronda and Kathy and Evan, because it was their great thinking and dedication that gave us sports. Remember, we were watching on ESPN the Masters from like 1990.
You were welcome. Yes.
I mean, if I had to watch the Tiger King again on Netflix, I think it would have qualified as torture. But so people were yearning for this, and our 3 panelists were all part of the solution, and they could have just folded up their tent, but they didn't. And so you essentially have television ratings, which will come back. Like the NFL is the most popular sport in the country, but it's also the most popular TV show. And every week, 5 to 10 of the top rated shows are nighttime NFL football. So we'll be fine with TV revenue. We'll be fine with merchandising and memorabilia, because you look at Ronda and you want to have that San Diego logo on something. So then it's all about games. And what we're seeing is that people feel really safe at the games. And you certainly can start to have more fans, because They can temperature test you when you walk in. They have you wearing a mask. They're not row after row of people all over each other. And so we can definitely have more fans. So it's going to be a temporary whack to basketball, which had no fans, to baseball, which had no fans, and to football, which has limited fans. But I think as time goes on, we'll be able to restore gates. So it's a temporary whack, but it'll come back. I loved baseball this year. I love basketball, and those sports will come back. Golf's not going anywhere. You can drive around and see the people out playing. So the point is that temporarily it's going to mess with salary caps. So the sports that do rev shares, if you take the rev of gate out, and it's 38% in football, and I would guess it's higher in baseball. So that's we have a temporary thing, but players associations, leagues, teams all have to be part of understanding this never happened before. This was just dropped on us from somewhere on high. No one's ever experienced this before. And so instead of folding the tent, the sports are going on. It'll be interesting to see baseball free agency and whether or not you get those sorts of contracts. Basketball free agency doesn't quite have the players it had before. We'll continue holding the drafts. People will be interested. LaMelo Ball and his psycho father. And people will continue to be interested in it, and the economics will take a whack this year and take a whack next year, and then in the long run they'll be fine.
I would actually, so I agree with everything Leigh said from a short run perspective, and that's the downside case. But I would actually take that question and potentially go the other way, which is I think there's an upside case in the long run to what happened, because sports were forced to innovate in ways that they may not have been able to were it not for a pandemic. So part of my job is to come up with crazy ideas for ways to change basketball. And not surprisingly, I run into a lot of traditionalists who say, well, you can't do that, right? So we can't play 7-inning doubleheaders as much as I love that as a baseball fan. We can't start overtimes with, a lower basket or sort of some modified thing like that. But we did add a play-in game this past season, right? Which in the past would have been sacrosanct. Oh, that's 8 teams in the playoffs. You can't have more. That may be something now that we build on and implement in this coming season as well, even a bigger tournament, right? So if you start to think about the virtual fan experience, are there new digital experiences and packages that fans can engage with? There may actually be more revenue drivers coming out of this period because of how sports were forced to adapt. That yes, right now, those things are just filling a gap that exists because we don't have fans in the buildings. Yeah. But in the long run, if fans are back, well, those things become additive then. So I actually see some potential upside to what we've all gone through and will continue to go through over the next year or two.
I would agree on that too. And I think a lot for us, and, with baseball, we're so used to everything being set in stone, a year before everything happens, we know our schedule, we know our salaries, everything's contractual. By the time we hit spring training in February, it's just autopilot, basically for the rest of the season, unless there's some crazy wacky trade or something involving, big dollars moving back and forth. So for us to, be at that stage where we thought we knew everything that was going to happen, and that was for us, our single biggest issue is when, missing the gate, because that is such a large percentage of, how we pay our bills, quite frankly, and how we pay our players. And we're one of the smaller market teams, and I know what our player salary was, and it's contractual and it's guaranteed. So that was the biggest sticking point, is without that, $100 million of revenue between concessions and parking and tickets and all of that other stuff. How do you pay a team salary of, whatever the number is, insert number here for the teams. And so that's, I think that going into, unless we have clear indication that next year is going to be somewhat normal with full season and, fans in the stands at whatever the capacity is. And what is that capacity? Is that jurisdictional capacity? Is that a number set by the commissioner's office. We're here down in San Diego in the purple tier. We couldn't have fans if we wanted to. So how do we make that up and commit more money to players' salaries when we don't, for lack of a better word, know how we're going to pay for it? Borrowing money is all fine and dandy, but 2 years down the road, you still have all that debt. So it's really going to be a struggle between each of the teams, and which teams have the capacity to borrow and which teams have the capital contributions from their ownership groups and things like that. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on, at least in baseball right now behind the scenes of, how much are we going to spend in the free agency market this off season?
Kathy, how does that compare with the outlook that you see for the LPGA?
Yeah, I was thinking back, and I probably would agree with everyone in kind of your comments. I think it's fair to say that we're planning for a world where there's going to be some level of dealing with this for some time, whether that's testing protocols, is that, those types of things, at least at a minimum through the summer and perhaps through the whole year. And again, as we look at other geographic regions, if we think about playing in Asia, we're playing in Europe, things are different in different places. But it is interesting, and I was thinking back on what Evan was talking about. And I think in all sports, there's traditional ways, and probably golf probably is the poster child for, the game is a certain way. But one thing that we have really learned is that we can create some real connections with our athletes and our partners in a way that is off the golf course. So the ability to be able to, whether it's having, a 30-minute chat with your favorite athlete, really we're kind of replicating that on-course experience. It might actually turn some new revenue opportunities for us that, if someone is a partner in South Dakota and there isn't a golf tournament that's in their neighboring area, there's a way to experience the LPGA beyond just watching a broadcast. So I think there's some real opportunities there to do that. It's not going to be fun. I think it's still going to be tough over the next months. We're actually kind of looking to compress our schedule and start playing more in March and trying to push it back as long as possible and stay kind of out of the Asian markets. But our athletes are ready to play. And one thing that makes it unique in a sport like golf and tennis is when the players aren't playing, they're not getting paid. So they're all independent contractors. So they don't have some of the guarantees that some of the other athletes might have in other sports. So it's been a really challenging time, and we have to do everything we can to get them back out on the field, which we did pretty well this year.
So one of the questions that I've gotten here is from Jay Todd, and I think I know the answer to it, but I'm going to open it up to the room. Have Leigh and Ronda ever sat across from the table, or sat across from each other at the negotiating table, either literal or virtually?
I have not. I usually get involved in the trade deals more from, how can we make this work? Here's what I want to agree to. Can we make this work? I've never actually been in the room with our general manager and a player and his agent. So.
Okay.
Well, Randy, the funny thing about that question is the partner I had in baseball for a long, long time bought the San Diego Padres. And I had draft picks with him. Since we had always negotiated together, it was quite an
Evan, from the NBA's perspective, and I asked a similar question here to Ronda about anything that was experimental this season that she felt like could have staying power moving forward. And I wonder and you could take this any way you want, is this from a bubble logistics standpoint or from an actual on-court product, but how do you feel like the NBA may encourage that sort of level of creativity moving forward, coming out of the opportunity that maybe the bubble and this very odd season presented?
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, things like a play-in game, right, which we've looked at for a long time as ways to drive competitive incentives towards the end of a season. It was particularly helpful this past year because, one, we weren't going to finish the year, and you weren't going to have those teams fighting for playoff spots have the opportunity to complete what would have been their schedule. And we even had teams finishing with a different number of combined regular season and seeding games. So it was sort of a way to smooth out those imbalances. But it's absolutely something we want to look to build on going forward and continue to experiment with and tweak, because it really can, as baseball has seen, have fundamental changes to the way teams approach, particularly the end of the season, based on those playoff races. So that's one. Certainly the virtual fan element, we hope we'll have fans back in the building someday, but this season coming up, which arguably is going to be even harder to execute for us than the bubble, because we're planning for players to be living at home, living in market, traveling, and that comes with risks. And so how do you manage around that? But we know individual teams are looking at ways to get, if not actual fans, how do you get virtual fans in the building? How do you engage season ticket holders in a way through digital platforms? So that's a big one. On court, we did a couple things. So we had referee mics, which was a bit of a change to the way we communicate results of replay. Obviously, NFL has been doing that for a long time, but that was widely appreciated by our fans, that there was more of a human interaction with the referees, understanding what the calls were, different camera angles that we were able to leverage based on the setup at the bubble, the lack of fans. And so really learning from all those things to just fundamentally think differently about the game, the broadcast, the player experience, the referee experience. Like I said, I expect there'll be a lot of changes in the coming years, not just for the NBA, but for all sports.
Randy, I think that you should know that each of our panelists in all of the sports have been creating alternative ways to enjoy sports than the traditional ways. So for example, we have a project that's virtual reality, where Patrick Mahomes is the key. You put the helmet on, you look at the guys running towards you while you're trying to complete a pass, and based on what you do with the ball in your hand, it triggers either catastrophic sacks or touchdown passes, but you feel like you're right in the stadium. There's a new football league that allows the fans, it's all done in the studio, but it allows the fans to draft the players, to hire the coach, to do all of the things an owner would do based on the amount of participation.
Mm-hmm.
The use of social media, the way information is now translated, has completely shifted. So I would fight with my brothers for who got to read the sports section first. And today they don't know that a newspaper exists. So it's all about what's your currency, how many followers you have on Twitter, how many followers on Instagram, how many followers you have on Facebook or TikTok or Snapchat. And all of those forums, we figured out ways to bring the athletes closer to the fans. And let's not forget fantasy sports, right? Which draws a lot of people. Let's not forget gambling. That's not going anywhere. There are multiple ways to enjoy the sport, even if you don't go to the stadium. And to pick up on what Evan said, some of these things are so creative that they will be great revenue sources for the future.
Yeah. We are just up against it timing wise. I think I'd like to maybe go quickly around to each of our panelists one last time and maybe get a very, 2, 3, 4, 5 word answer to their level of optimism for either their sport or sports in general in 2021. So Kathy, I want to start with you. What level of optimism is what?
I want to say hi. I know that we'll be playing. I think we need to be cautious about what to expect, but we're ready to go, ready to keep players playing. So we're excited.
Rhonda, how about you?
I would say pretty much the same thing, cautiously optimistic, obviously planning for a return of fans in the stadium. The piped-in fan noise just there's nothing like the real thing. So we've got to figure it out.
Okay. Evan, how about you?
Nervous now, growing optimism as we get later into 2021 with vaccine developments and the like, but certainly going to be a challenging 6 months.
And Leigh, for you?
Optimistic. Sports survived World War II. Sports survived the Great Depression. Sports has survived everything else. And the worse things get in the world, the more we need sports for entertainment.
Hear, hear. Thank you all. Thank you all for your time, for your insight, for your experiences, and for your optimism. Let's be honest, moving forward here in 2021. So Evan, Kathy, Rhonda, Leigh, thank you all. And thanks to everybody participating in the chat, and for contributing your questions. And maybe if you feel like it, for watching SportsCenter in the morning, 7 a.m. Eastern on ESPN. Maybe if you feel like it, we'll see. Thanks everyone.